But at the end of the day, I think Bitcoin leads the stock market. And so what Bitcoin is telling us is, hey, the US government is not printing as much money as we thought they would when Trump got in office. And therefore, I think Bitcoin is telling us that there is a severe stock market correction on the horizon. I think we're nearing sort of the exhaustion point of this corrective pattern before we sort of go sideways for a bit and go higher.
The markets are shifting, liquidity is tightening, and Bitcoin's next big move is on the horizon. Arthur Hayes, legendary trader and former BitMEX CEO, has been making bold calls. 100K Bitcoin was just the beginning, but could we really see $1 million BTC by the end of the decade? In this exclusive deep dive, Arthur breaks down why global economic policies, central bank money printing, and geopolitical tensions could fuel Bitcoin's next parabolic rally. But is Trump's presidency actually slowing things down? And what does this mean for altcoins? Stay tuned as we unpack Arthur's latest insights on market volatility, the role of inflation, and the future of crypto. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of our high-impact crypto content. Let's get into it.
Hayes predicts 100K Bitcoin by the end of the year, so that was the right call. And you also talked about what's next. 2025 could see $1 million. Is that still in the cards? He says your former BitMEX co-founder expects Yellen to inject at least $301 billion and a maximum of $1.05 trillion between now and year end. Can you just comment on what you said here and how that's
When did I write this? Sorry, what was the date on that article?
This was August 14th, 2024.
Okay. So again, I think and this is probably heretical to a lot of Bitcoin people, especially those in America, if the Democrats had won the election, yes, they probably would have kept shitting on crypto companies. And that's obviously not good for a lot of people in the United States. However, they would continue printing a lot more money faster than what Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing. Not that I don't think we're going to end up in the same place, but if you take what the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, and mimetic Doge Department advisory thing is doing, looking at all the ridiculous things that government agencies are spending, there's obviously a large amount of fraud embedded in sort of the spending patterns of the U.S. government, and that was sort of turbocharged after the COVID debacle. And you can see that the Democrats, at least in the United States, had no intention of reining that back. If anything, they were going to go even harder at spending more and more money, printing money. And you had the Treasury doing it, and you had the Federal Reserve enabling it as well. And so I believe this is in August, and at that point, it was about a 50-50, at least in my mind, a coin toss as of who would win the election. But the Democrats being the party in power, they could use the relevant government agencies to try to inject more liquidity, pump the markets, and get people feeling good on election days, and they would go and vote for the candidate Kamala Harris. Or I don't know if Joe Biden was still in the race at that point. But in any event, I think we've obviously had sort of the Trump pump, and then the realization that the money is not going to be forthcoming as quickly as it would have been if it had been a Democrat in power, because not only would they have the Treasury under their control, they would also have the Federal Reserve, because Jerome Powell and some of the Fed governors have been very vocal about their distaste for Donald Trump. And now all of a sudden, Jerome Powell has found his hawkish inflation fighting credentials when he was cutting rates in September of 2024, right before the election, when the U.S. economy was doing just fine and inflation was bottoming, if not re-accelerating. So I think it's a very curious stance that the federal chairman has now all of a sudden because Donald Trump is in office. All that is to say that I think the Democrats would have printed more money faster, and the Bitcoin price would be higher than it is today. Kamala Harris is in office.
So just to sum up, if I understand it correctly, are you suggesting, Arthur, and correct me if I'm wrong, that ironically, even though Trump's more pro-crypto policies could be bullish long-term, his pro-growth stance may put a pause on Fed easing, and so therefore liquidity is not injected as quickly, and therefore we're not going to get a bull market as quickly?
Correct.
Interesting. Well, this week's been bad for risk assets, Bitcoin included. It's now below 90,000. It's now around 85,000 as we speak. And it's just got a lot of people in the Bitcoin community worried. Are we looking at a further decline right now? Is it just following the stock market at this point, or are there other narratives pushing Bitcoin around?
So I think Bitcoin is leading the stock market.
Yeah.
Obviously, we just had NVIDIA earnings a few hours ago. They were kind of good. Um, we'll see if the market wanted more out of them in terms of what they were expecting in terms of growth and margins and revenue and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I think Bitcoin leads the stock market. And so what Bitcoin is telling us is, hey, the US government is not printing as much money as we thought they would when Trump got in office. The Treasury General account has not declined that materially yet. Obviously, there's a debt ceiling dynamics. It's an open question whether Donald Trump can get his first spending bill passed. I know it's passed the sort of preliminary House committee, and now it'll have to go up for a vote in the House and the Senate. And it'll be interesting to see if the recalcitrant Republicans were like to claim that they care about fiscal responsibility, pipe up and sort of torpedo this bill, and then Donald Trump can't spend any money. So and then also you have the Elon Musk and Doge funding all the fraud in the U.S. government spending. How big that is, we don't know. It could be as high as 1 to 2 trillion. It could be as low as 200 billion. Again, if that money is basically not spent, that's cash that's not getting into the hands of people in the American economy, whether they deserve it or not is not the point. They buy stuff with it, whether it's financial assets, whether it's a new car, a washing machine, go on vacation, whatever. They spend money. There's a money multiplier on it. And that money, if it's not being spent, then that reduces liquidity and Bitcoin will suffer. And so will the stock market. If people, I know your listeners and viewers are quite attuned to the geopolitics and economics. The US government is about 25% of nominal GDP in the United States. So it is the outperformance of the US economy over the past 2 to 3 years is primarily predicated on the US government spending money. And so if the US government's not going to spend as much money, because either Donald Trump cannot, because he can't get a spending bill passed, or Elon is cutting waste out of the government and they're not replacing it with new spending, and that's going to negatively impact risk assets, negatively impact US GDP. And therefore, I think Bitcoin is telling us that there is a severe stock market correction on the horizon, unless, of course, that spending reaccelerates. So that's sort of where I'm at in this sort of mindset. And we're at 85,000. Could we go to 75? Possibly, but I think we're nearing sort of the exhaustion point of this corrective pattern before we sort of go sideways for a bit and go higher.
An interesting development happened a couple of weeks ago, actually about a month ago, Arthur, which is DeepSeek kind of spooked the U.S. tech market. Big sell-off in the NASDAQ following the release of DeepSeek that week. And as you know, Bitcoin actually went down alongside the rest of the stock market. Could you see kind of side events, if you want to call it that, things that have nothing to do with crypto actually draining liquidity and risk assets and thus pulling down crypto? Is that a risk for you?
I mean, who knows? At the end of the day, I guess look at the liquidity at the end of the day. That's my sort of North Star. And China's not printing money because they're sort of holding back their bazooka to see what sort of trade agreement they come to with the US. The BOJ said they're going to start tapering purchases of bonds. We'll see if that's actually the case. But dollar yen is strengthening, which is liquidity negative globally. And then you have the United States as sort of like a wait and see. The Fed is antagonistic towards Trump, so they're not going to help him out by lowering the price of money or increasing the quantity. And then you have sort of this spending, whether he's going to get a spending bill passed or whether Elon is going to cut enough money out of the government budget and they're not going to replace it with new spending.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to talk about your $1 million outlook. Now that Trump is in office, the Democrats aren't. What could potentially take Bitcoin 10x to $1 million, which is the next big round number that people are looking forward to?
So at the end of the day, Trump and every other major political force around the world is preaching localism, nationalism, my country first. We're not going to rely on a global supply chain of products because, pandemic happened or we're in a fight with the other side. Therefore, we need to build things locally. And obviously, everyone replicates the same productive capacity that is inflationary. And it requires a lot of money because everyone essentially outsourced their productive capacity to China, which is extremely efficient at it. But now I'm going to rebuild it in my more expensive, less populated country, mostly in the United States and Western Europe. So this requires a huge amount of capital And the private savings market doesn't have the money. It's all the foreigners who have the money. And the foreigners, China and Japan, Saudi Arabia, oil exporters, obviously don't want to basically fund people that hate them or consider them strategic competitors or whatever euphemism you want to call it, to rebuild their infrastructure. So that savings is not going to be provided to the US and Western Europe. So they're going to have to print the money because they don't have any of it, the private savers. And so I think secularly, regardless of who is in office, this move towards my own supply chain, my own production in my own country, my own sphere of influence and sort of trading market is going to lead to money printing. And so that's how we get to $1 million Bitcoin. Let's increase the bank lending so that they build the new factories. Let's sequester savings and do yield curve control, whether outright or surreptitiously, to fix the yield of government bonds while we inflate the supply of credit. So that's how we get to $1 million Bitcoin. How fast we get there, I don't know, but I do think that this is on the horizon before the end of the decade.
In that scenario that you just described, Arthur, that particular scenario, what happens to the rest of the crypto market? Will the altcoins follow, or will Bitcoin dominance just skyrocket?
I think the altcoins will follow, I think, but investors are getting a lot more specific about what they are investing in. We had different cycles of applications on these decentralized networks or these app chains. And so we want to see user growth. We want to see revenue. We want to see tokenomics that benefit us as the token holder relative to early investors. And so every single cycle, we get a little bit more specific. And obviously, only the best in class application accrues value. And it's much harder for just your random shitcoin to 100x just because it has the right buzzword in the name. So again, it's going to require much more effort on the part of investors to choose an application that actually has real fundamentals. It's not just going to be, I guess, sprayed a bunch of money and guess what? My worst performing token was only up 10x, best one was up 1,000x. Like that was 2017, 2020. That's not happening again.